In the final decades of the 19th century, when America's industrial titans had conquered steel and steam, when their fortunes rivaled the treasuries of nations, their daughters discovered a frontier that money alone could not purchase, the ancient bloodlines of Europe. Simultaneously, across the Atlantic, in crumbling manor houses where portraits of long-dead warriors gazed down upon empty coffers, the British aristocracy faced a choice between pride and survival. What emerged was a grand bargain that would reshape two civilizations. American millions would flow eastward to restore decaying estates, while westward would travel the most precious currency of all, titles that transformed merchants' daughters into duchesses. Today we take you back in time to the age of the so-called dollar princesses, when love became diplomacy and marriage became the ultimate merger, forever altering the destiny of two nations bound by language but divided by centuries of tradition. Have you ever wondered what kind of woman could survive having the future Prime Minister of Britain emerge from her womb 7 months after her wedding day? Then spend the next 4 decades collecting lovers like rare orchids, while somehow maintaining her position in the highest echelons of British society? Meet Jennie Jerome Churchill, the mother of none other than Winston Churchill himself, and the Brooklyn-born American heiress whose alleged 200 lovers became the stuff of Victorian legend, yet whose real story proves far more fascinating than any tabloid gossip could manufacture. In an era when proper ladies were expected to lie back, think of England, and produce heirs with minimal fuss, this particular dollar princess transformed scandal into social currency, motherhood into political strategy, and bedroom conquests into drawing-room power. On today's episode of Old Money Allure, we explore how one woman's supposed sexual appetite became one of the most persistent tales in British aristocratic history, overshadowing the remarkable achievements of a mother who wielded more influence through wit and determination than bedroom conquests ever could. Born Jeanette Jerome on January 9, 1854 in Brooklyn, a location about as aristocratic as a hot dog stand, the future Lady Randolph Churchill emerged from thoroughly American stock that would make British blue bloods wince with democratic horror. Her father, Leonard Jerome, ruled Wall Street with the imperial confidence of a man nicknamed the King of Wall Street. Accumulating wealth with the same ruthless efficiency, his daughter would later apply to collecting admirers across 2 continents. The Jerome family's cosmopolitan lifestyle included summers in Newport and extended periods in Paris, where young Jennie and her sisters caught the attention of Empress Eugenie herself, providing the kind of European polish that would prove invaluable when navigating the treacherous waters of British high society. In 1873, during a regatta that lasted precisely 3 days, 19-year-old Jennie encountered Lord Randolph Churchill, the second son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough, in what can only be described as the Victorian equivalent of a speed-dating success story. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in marriage on April 15, 1874, making Jennie one of the pioneering dollar princesses, American heiresses who traded their father's industrial fortunes for British titles with the calculating precision of Wall Street brokers. The wedding bells had barely stopped ringing when the first scandal erupted with all the subtlety of a 4th of July fireworks display. Winston Churchill's birth on November 30, 1874, at Blenheim Palace occurred under circumstances that would fuel whispered speculation for decades. The official announcement in the Times diplomatically described it as premature, but the timing suggested either exceptional medical circumstances or extraordinarily poor Victorian mathematics. 7 months after their wedding day, Jennie had produced a future Prime Minister, leading to the kind of drawing-room calculations that made even seasoned gossips reach for their smelling salts. Lord Randolph's own letter to his mother-in-law described how Jennie had a fall on Tuesday, walking with the shooters, and a rather imprudent and rough drive in a pony carriage brought on the pains on Saturday night, an explanation that satisfied precisely no one with functioning arithmetic skills. Contrary to popular legends about Winston being born in a closet or ladies' room during a society ball, the birth actually occurred in a bedroom at Blenheim Palace that was temporarily serving as a cloakroom for guests' coats. Hardly the dramatic emergency portrayed in later mythology, but sufficiently scandalous for Victorian sensibilities. The labour lasted over 24 hours, during which Jennie demonstrated the same iron constitution she would later deploy in surviving decades of social warfare and financial crises. This premature arrival would prove prophetic of Winston's entire relationship with conventional timing, a man who would spend his career arriving either too early or too late for popular opinion, yet somehow managing to be precisely on schedule for history's most crucial moments. But the baby's questionable conception timeline was merely the opening act in a drama that would span 4 decades, 3 marriages, and enough romantic entanglements to populate a small European principality, with whispers already beginning to circulate about just how many men might find themselves welcomed into the future Lady Randolph's increasingly crowded affections. The persistent legend of Jennie Churchill's 200 lovers represents one of history's most mathematically improbable sexual achievements, requiring logistics that would challenge a military quartermaster and stamina that would exhaust a thoroughbred racehorse. This sensational figure originated with Irish novelist George Moore, who tossed off the claim with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather, providing exactly 0 evidence to support his arithmetic of adultery. The mathematical impossibility becomes gloriously apparent under scrutiny. Assuming Jennie maintained romantic relationships between ages 20 and 30-60, she would have averaged 5 lovers per year, sustaining 10-week relationships with only brief intermissions for recuperation and wardrobe changes. Such a schedule would have required the organisational skills of a railway timetable coordinator and the physical resilience of an Olympic athlete, all while maintaining her position as one of London's premier political hostesses. Victorian and Edwardian transportation limitations alone render this scenario logistically absurd. Coordinating 200 clandestine affairs across Britain and Europe would have required advanced planning that would make D-Day operations seem spontaneous. Modern scholarship has demolished this titillating fiction with the ruthless efficiency of historians armed with actual evidence rather than prurient imagination. Celia and John Lee, granted unprecedented access to Churchill family papers through their friendship with Winston's nephew, Peregrine Churchill, concluded that Jennie's actual romantic partners numbered a dozen or fewer, a figure considerably less sensational but infinitely more believable. Their exhaustive examination of thousands of previously unseen family documents, including intimate correspondence locked away for decades, revealed evidence of only one affair that possibly overlapped with her marriage to Randolph, her relationship with Polish Count Charles Kinsky. The 200 lovers myth persists because it is easy to rattle off and prurient enough to raise a website's Google Analytics, never mind whether it is even feasible, serving the Internet age's appetite for scandal over substance. Historian William Manchester dismissed Moore's claim as absurd because Jennie was far too fastidious for that, and only she would have known the figure anyhow. Observation that cuts through decades of biographical gossip with surgical precision. The documented reality reveals a far more restrained romantic life, though one that certainly challenged Victorian propriety with strategic precision. The most thoroughly confirmed extramarital relationship was with Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, though this affair commenced only after Lord Randolph's death in 1895, making it technically irrelevant to questions of marital fidelity. The Churchill Archives Centre at Cambridge holds extensive correspondence between the Prince and Jennie, providing concrete evidence of their intimate relationship that lasted approximately 2 years, and was characterised by historians as primarily sexual convenience for both parties. The Prince's letters address her as ma chère, rather than the formal Lady Randolph, while Jennie's pet name for the future monarch was Tum Tum, correspondence that reads like the Victorian equivalent of modern text messaging between friends with benefits. Their relationship included the Prince requesting Japanese tea, while Jennie wore her kimono, suggesting role-playing preferences that would have scandalised proper Victorian society had they become public knowledge. The prince's teasing references to her next-loved victims demonstrate the casual nature of their arrangement, conducted within the sexually permissive atmosphere of the Marlborough house set, where affairs were treated as sophisticated entertainment rather than moral catastrophes. An earlier incident in 1889 had foreshadowed their eventual liaison, when Lord Randolph came home to find the prince and his wife together, scandalously unchaperoned, and angrily expelled the future king from his house, a confrontation that would have ended lesser men's social careers but merely postponed royal romantic ambitions. The relationship carried significant political implications beyond personal gratification, enhancing Jennie's social standing and political influence as a member of the prince's inner circle, where intimate relationships served as diplomatic currency in the complex economy of aristocratic power. Yet even this royal affair paled beside Jennie's most emotionally significant relationship, a 12-year romance that would test her loyalty to marriage, motherhood, and social convention in ways that would make her brief fling with future royalty seem like a casual weekend diversion. Count Charles Kinsky represented everything the 200 Lovers myth was designed to obscure. A genuine love affair that lasted 12 years and nearly convinced Jennie Churchill to abandon her marriage for a future that aristocratic society would never forgive. Karl Kinsky, born into Austrian nobility in 1858, achieved his two greatest British goals in rapid succession: appointment as Austro-Hungarian attaché to Britain and victory in the 1883 Grand National riding his own horse Zoedone. The Count was devastated when Zoedone was poisoned 2 years later, demonstrating the deep emotional investment he made in his pursuits, a romantic intensity he would soon transfer to the captivating American-born Lady Randolph. Their affair began during Kinsky's success in British society, when he became completely infatuated by her, launching a relationship spanning approximately 1883 to 1895 and representing Jennie's longest and most emotionally sustained extramarital attachment. For over a decade, Kinsky urged Jennie to divorce Randolph and choose a future with him, offering the passionate devotion that Victorian novels promised but rarely delivered in aristocratic marriages of convenience. The relationship was an open secret, though Jennie later claimed she would not have spent the time that she did with Kinsky were it not for the unfounded rumours of an affair being spread by society gossips, a statement that would have made even credulous dinner-party guests choke on their champagne. During this romantic rebellion, Jennie enhanced her reputation as a social iconoclast, with an alleged snake tattoo encircling her left wrist, making her one of the few tattooed women in high society and embracing a trend sweeping through Victorian aristocracy like wildfire. The late Victorian period witnessed a surprising tattoo craze among the upper classes, with 3/4 of New York City's society ladies adopting the fashion by the 20th century's turn, favouring butterflies, flowers and dragons concealed beneath jewellery and gloves. These women, required by custom to keep their bodies covered, brought tattoo artists into their homes for ink in hidden places, using body art as an expression of independence and a form of rebellion against suffocating social constraints. Whether Jennie's snake tattoo actually existed remains historically ambiguous. Some biographers question its existence, while others argue that Jennie Churchill, who was the premier fashion influencer of her day, might well have embraced the trend. The Kinsky affair ended in 1895 under heartbreaking circumstances that would have satisfied the most demanding Victorian melodrama enthusiast. While Jennie accompanied her dying husband on their final world journey, Kinsky's family pleaded with him to make a suitable marriage to preserve the dynasty. The sacrifice required for marriage to Jennie was immense. Any union would be morganatic, meaning no child would be of noble rank or inherit his titles, estates, or wealth. A price too steep for a man whose family had maintained aristocratic status for centuries. Kinsky finally surrendered to family pressure and became engaged to Countess Elizabeth Wolfe Metternich zur Gracht, 20 years old, while Kinsky was 35. The timing proved particularly cruel. Jennie learned of the engagement just as she was about to be widowed and finally free to marry her lover of 12 years, watching her greatest romantic opportunity evaporate at the precise moment it might have become reality. Kinski kept a framed portrait of Jennie in his study until his death in 1919, suggesting his feelings remained strong, despite political necessity, forcing him into a loveless marriage. After Lord Randolph's death from syphilis in 1895 left 41-year-old Jennie facing financial chaos that spiralled out of control, she embarked on a matrimonial strategy that would make her previous scandals seem quaint by comparison. In 1900, Jennie married George Cornwallis West, a handsome guards officer only 16 days older than Winston, creating the bizarre situation where Winston's stepfather was practically his contemporary and definitely younger than his stepmother's legendary romantic stamina. The 20-year age difference caused such scandal that George's parents stayed away from the wedding, while the Churchill family demonstrated support by attending this union that challenged every Victorian assumption about appropriate matrimonial mathematics. The marriage lasted from 1900 to 1914, marked by George's increasing resentment and financial difficulties so severe that when they divorced, George obligingly took a stack of her unpaid bills, perhaps the most expensive divorce settlement in British history. In 1918, at age 64, Jennie achieved her masterpiece of matrimonial scandal by marrying Montague Porch, a colonial administrator 20 years her junior, who was 3 years younger than Winston, making family dinners exercises in genealogical confusion that would have challenged even the most flexible social conventions. Montague Porch, born in 1877 with a degree from Oxford, had served with distinction in the South African War and worked in Nigeria, credentials suggesting genuine attachment rather than mere fortune hunting, though the age difference provided endless material for society gossips. Despite social scandal, this marriage appears to have been Jennie's happiest, with the couple wedding in a simple ceremony, Jennie wearing a grey coat and skirt and a light green toque, while Porch wore his officer's uniform in proceedings described as unheralded and simple. Porch wrote to Winston reassuring his future stepson of his commitment to Jennie, adding poignantly, "It seems almost incredible that today, when our world is in anguish, I should be allowed so much happiness." Yet while society obsessed over Jennie's bedroom arrangements, her professional achievements were revolutionising women's roles in British cultural and political life, with the same audacity she applied to matrimonial conventions. In 1899, Jennie founded the Anglo-Saxon Review, a prestigious quarterly featuring contributions from Henry James, Winston Churchill and Stephen Crane, each issue bound in replica antique bindings with subscribers, including royalty and heads of state. During the Boer War, Jennie organised the American Ladies' Hospital Ship Fund, raising over $150,000 to convert and equip the hospital ship Maine, then personally sailed to South Africa, and worked as a nursing aide treating wounded soldiers, including her own son, Jack. Her writing output included reminiscences of Lady Randolph Churchill, theatrical works, and small talks on big subjects, demonstrating literary ambitions that extended far beyond drawing-room conversation. Jennie pioneered interior design before the term was invented, her house-flipping ventures providing much-needed income during financially challenging later years, while establishing her as an aesthetic innovator in domestic decoration. Paradoxically, despite her groundbreaking achievements, Jennie opposed women's suffrage, serving as president of the North Wales Anti-Suffrage League and delivering speeches denouncing the suffragette movement because she believed women wielded greater power through charm and diplomacy than through the vote. This contradiction reflected complex attitudes of upper-class women who had achieved influence through traditional channels and feared political equality might diminish their existing privileges, a position incomprehensible to modern feminists but sensible to someone who had conquered British society through wit, beauty, and strategic romantic alliances. Jennie's most enduring achievement was shaping Winston Churchill's career, becoming his ardent ally, furthering my plans and guarding my interests through organising lecture tours, arranging meetings with figures like Mark Twain and Theodore Roosevelt, and providing financial support during his early political career. When Jennie Churchill died on June 29, 1921, at age 67 following complications from a broken leg, she left behind a legacy that transcended the sensational mythology of 200 lovers. A woman who had broken barriers, challenged conventions, and shaped the man who would save Western civilization, all while maintaining her position at the pinnacle of British society through sheer force of personality and unshakable determination to live life entirely on her own terms. Picture yourself at 17, wearing a silk gown worth a kingdom, tears soaking your pillow the night before your wedding. Your mother has just threatened to have the man you actually love killed. Tomorrow, you'll marry a duke you barely know, trading your happiness for a coronet. This isn't the beginning of a Gothic novel. It's the true story of Consuelo Vanderbilt, the reluctant duchess whose journey from gilded prisoner to independent woman would rewrite the rules of society. When they called her the most beautiful debutante in America, they didn't realize they were describing a masterpiece trapped in its own frame. This is the story of how wealth beyond imagination became chains of gold, and how one woman's rebellion against the glittering cage of the Gilded Age would inspire generations. On the 2nd of March 1877, as America's Gilded Age reached its glittering zenith, Consuelo Vanderbilt entered life bearing the weight of expectations that would nearly crush her spirit. Born into America's wealthiest family, she emerged from childhood carrying both extraordinary beauty and invisible chains, a combination that would shape her destiny in ways both magnificent and tragic. Alva Vanderbilt, her mother, wielded ambition like a weapon, carving out the family's place in society with the same ruthless determination that her husband William Kissam Vanderbilt used to expand their railroad empire. Young Consuelo, blessed with a swan-like neck, luminous eyes, and an ethereal grace that turned heads wherever she went, became her mother's masterpiece in making. Every breath, every gesture, every word was sculpted according to Alva's exacting standards. The limestone mansion at 65th Avenue, where Consuelo spent her formative years, served as both palace and prison. Within its opulent walls, she endured a rigorous education that went far beyond the typical finishing school curriculum. Alva's iron will shaped every aspect of her daughter's upbringing, from deportment to discourse, moulding her into the perfect vessel for the family's social aspirations. The physical and emotional demands of this grooming paled in comparison to the psychological conditioning that accompanied it, constant reminders that the Vanderbilt name carried obligations that superseded personal happiness. As Consuelo grew, her mother's plans crystallized with frightening precision. Alva had not invested years of careful cultivation merely to see her daughter marry into American society. No, she had grander ambitions, a European title that would elevate the Vanderbilts above their nouveau riche peers. The fact that American heiresses had begun trading fortunes for coronets in what the press dubbed the dollar princess phenomenon only strengthened Alva's resolve. When Consuelo made her society debut in 1895, she set New York ablaze with speculation. Her grace and beauty made the other debutantes seem coarse by comparison. Her regal bearing seemed to presage her future role. But behind the carefully orchestrated appearances, behind the silk gowns and practiced smiles, a quiet rebellion was brewing. Consuelo had formed an attachment to a New York socialite, Winthrop Rutherford, whose lack of title made him unacceptable in Alva's calculating eyes. The summer season brought a whirlwind of social engagements, each one carefully orchestrated by Alva to position her daughter for the grand finale she had planned. As summer faded into autumn, whispers began circulating through Newport and New York about negotiations with a cash-strapped English duke. Consuelo, drowning in her mother's ambitions, found herself swept toward a fate she never chose, her own desires as irrelevant as last season's fashions. That autumn, as Manhattan's elite gathered in their Fifth Avenue mansions to trade gossip over tea, Alva Vanderbilt prepared to play her final hand in the game of social advancement. And the stakes were her daughter's heart and happiness, though such considerations seemed trivial compared to the glittering prize of a ducal coronet. Through the gilded halls of New York society, speculation mounted as November approached, each whispered conversation carrying the weight of impending transformation. In November 1895, as autumn's last leaves clung desperately to Manhattan's trees, Consuelo Vanderbilt faced the most devastating battle of her young life. Behind the magnificent doors of her family's Fifth Avenue mansion, Alva Vanderbilt orchestrated what would become known as one of the most ruthless matrimonial campaigns in American social history. The Duke of Marlborough had arrived in New York that fall, his ancient title burnished, but his coffers empty. Charles Spencer-Churchill, known since childhood as Sonny, came seeking what so many of his peers sought in America, a fortune to restore his crumbling ancestral seat, Blenheim Palace. In Consuelo, he found not only extraordinary beauty and impeccable breeding, but also the vast Vanderbilt wealth that could save his estate. The young heiress's resistance to the match sparked a domestic siege that would haunt her for decades. Alva, determined to secure a duchess's coronet for her daughter, employed tactics that shocked even their jaded social circle. When Consuelo's heart turned toward Winthrop Rutherford, Alva's rage knew no bounds. She even threatened to have the young man killed. Through emotional manipulation and relentless pressure, she wore down her daughter's resistance until the inevitable surrender. On the morning of the 6th of November, 1895, New York witnessed what the press dubbed the wedding of the century. St. Thomas Church overflowed with society's elite, the cream of American and European aristocracy gathering to witness the union. Yet few among the assembled guests could see the tears that had soaked Consuelo's pillow the night before, or sense the deep despair beneath her composed exterior. As she walked down the aisle in her Worth gown, her face partially concealed by a delicate veil, Consuelo carried the weight of her mother's ruthless ambition. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of social theatre, with Bishop Henry Codman Potter officiating as the Duke awaited his American bride. The wedding breakfast that followed at the Vanderbilt mansion featured a guest list that read like a complete edition of the social register. Yet amid the champagne toasts and celebratory fanfare, the newly minted Duchess of Marlborough remained oddly silent, her thoughts perhaps dwelling on what might have been. The price of this social triumph was calculated in cold numbers: a dowry of $2.5 million in railroad stock, a staggering sum equivalent to over $75 million in today's currency. The human cost, the sacrifice of a young woman's happiness and free will, went unrecorded in the society columns that breathlessly detailed every aspect of the celebration. In the weeks that followed, as Consuelo prepared for her new life in England, Manhattan's drawing rooms buzzed with speculation about the match. Some praised Alva's brilliant manoeuvring, while others whispered about the ruthlessness of her methods. But none could deny that she had achieved her ultimate goal. Her daughter would cross the Atlantic, not as another wealthy American bride, but as her Grace, the Duchess of Marlborough. As the newlyweds departed for England, leaving behind the glimmer of New York society, autumn storms battered the Atlantic. The turbulent crossing seemed an apt metaphor for the upheaval that awaited the reluctant Duchess in her new homeland, where ancient traditions and aristocratic expectations would test the limits of her endurance. Blenheim Palace rose before Consuelo in the late autumn of 1895, its massive facade a monument to centuries of aristocratic power. The seat of the Dukes of Marlborough stood as both a triumph of English Baroque architecture and a crushing symbol of the responsibilities that now lay upon her young shoulders. The American-born Duchess found herself mistress of one of England's grandest estates, its vast rooms and endless corridors, the weight of tradition she was expected to uphold. The crisis facing Blenheim was immediate and severe. Years of neglect had left the palace in a state of elegant decay that even its magnificent architecture could no longer disguise. Water damage threatened priceless tapestries, while entire wings stood empty, their furnishings sold off by previous generations. The marriage settlement, which provided an annual income of $100,000 to the Duke and an additional $100,000 to Consuelo, would soon be put to use, funding extensive renovations that would save this architectural treasure from ruin. Yet even as she threw herself into the restoration of Blenheim, Consuelo discovered that renovating a palace was far easier than building a marriage. The Duke, while unfailingly polite, maintained an emotional distance that grew more pronounced with each passing month. Their union, founded on mutual duty rather than affection, settled into a pattern of elaborate courtesy that masked profound loneliness on both sides. Motherhood arrived with mechanical precision, as demanded by duty. The birth of their first son, John Albert Edward William Spencer-Churchill, in 8 fulfilled the primary obligation of a duchess, providing an heir to the dukedom. A second son, Lord Ivor Spencer-Churchill, followed in 1898, completing the expected heir and spare. The children brought moments of joy to Consuelo's life, but they could not fill the emotional void at the heart of her marriage. The young duchess found her true calling in the role of social reformer. She threw herself into philanthropic works with an energy that surprised and sometimes scandalized traditional aristocratic circles. Under her direction, Blenheim became a centre for progressive social initiatives. She established programs for the estate's workers and their families, including housing improvements and educational opportunities. Her work with London's poor, particularly unwed mothers and their children, revealed a compassion that transcended class boundaries. In English society, Consuelo's beauty and natural grace made her a sensation. The American Duchess brought a fresh vitality to the often staid world of the British aristocracy, her presence at social functions drawing attention and admiration. Yet beneath the surface, success lay a growing awareness that she had traded one gilded cage for another. The Duke, meanwhile, pursued his own interests and companionship elsewhere. Their public appearances together became increasingly formal affairs, choreographed to maintain the appearance of marital harmony while masking the reality of their estrangement. The palace that had once seemed like a fairy tale setting began to feel more like an elaborate stage set for a performance neither of them believed in anymore. As the new century dawned, bringing with it winds of social change, Consuelo began to question the bargain that had brought her to Blenheim. The price of her title, her freedom, her happiness, her very sense of self seemed increasingly steep. The restoration of Blenheim was progressing, but the woman who had helped save it was quietly crumbling behind her perfect Duchess facade. In 1906, the facade finally began to crack, and the comfortable fiction of the Marlboroughs' marriage could no longer withstand the pressure of their mutual unhappiness. The Duchess, who had once been America's most celebrated bride, was about to scandalize society once again, this time by choosing her own path. The Marlboroughs' separation in 1906 marked the end of what society had once heralded as the perfect union of old-world nobility and new-world wealth. For Consuelo, now 29, the decision to separate marked the beginning of a profound personal transformation, though the legal bonds would take many more years to fully dissolve. In the aftermath of the separation, Consuelo emerged from the shadows of her imposed role to discover her own voice. No longer bound by the strict protocols of her position as Duchess of Marlborough, she threw herself into causes that reflected her true passions. Her work with the Women's Municipal Party in London revealed a keen political mind that had long been masked by her social duties. The suffragette movement found in her an eloquent advocate, her own experience of powerlessness lending authenticity to her support for women's rights. The years following the separation saw Consuelo flourish in unexpected ways. She established herself as a formidable public speaker, addressing crowds on social reform and women's suffrage. Her philanthropic work expanded, focusing particularly on improving conditions for women and children in London's most deprived areas. The woman who had once been valued primarily for her beauty and wealth proved herself a capable organiser and passionate advocate for social change. When World War I erupted in 1914, Consuelo channeled her organisational skills into vital war relief efforts. As chair of the Economic Relief Committee for the American Women's War Relief Fund, she worked tirelessly to aid those affected by the conflict. Her efforts during these years earned recognition from both the British government and international relief organisations, establishing her as a leader in humanitarian causes. Throughout these years, she maintained a dignified silence about her marriage, even as society buzzed with speculation. The Duke had his own life now, and Consuelo found herself increasingly drawn to a different future. In Jacques Balsan, a French pioneer of balloon and airplane aviation, she discovered the possibility of a love based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than social obligation. The long path to divorce finally concluded in 1921. The legal dissolution of her marriage to the Duke of Marlborough marked not just the end of a union, but the beginning of Consuelo's true independence. The Duke would later petition for an annulment from the Anglican Church, with Consuelo's consent, a process that would reach its conclusion in 1926. The annulment would validate what she had known all along, that her consent to the marriage had never been freely given. The years between separation and divorce had transformed the once dutiful Duchess into a woman of substance and independence. Her beauty, which had once been her primary currency in society's marriage market, was now merely one aspect of a complex and accomplished personality. The skills she had developed as a young Duchess were now directed toward meaningful, charitable initiatives, while her experience of arranged marriage made her a powerful voice for women's autonomy. As the post-war world emerged from the ashes of conflict, Consuelo stood ready to embrace a new chapter in her life. The woman who had once walked down the aisle of St. Thomas Church in tears now faced her future with clear-eyed determination. The price of her freedom had been high, but its value was beyond measure. In 1921, at the age of 44, Consuelo Vanderbilt began her second act. Her marriage to Jacques Balsan marked not just a new union, but the triumph of personal choice over social obligation. Unlike the theatrical spectacle of her first wedding, this ceremony celebrated a genuine connection between two people who had chosen each other freely. The contrast could not have been more profound. Where the young Duchess had once walked down the aisle in tears, Consuelo Balsan now moved forward with quiet joy. The years with Jacques proved transformative. Their shared life between France and America allowed Consuelo to bridge the two worlds that had shaped her existence. At their French estate, Château Saint-Georges Motel, she created the kind of home that Blenheim, for all its grandeur, had never been. The gardens she designed there reflected her mature taste, free from the constraints of aristocratic tradition. Her relationship with her sons, John and Ivor, evolved and deepened through the years, demonstrating that maternal bonds could survive and even thrive beyond the confines of a failed marriage. The 1930s brought new challenges as Europe darkened under the shadow of fascism. When France fell to Nazi Germany in 1940, the Balsans were forced to flee, leaving behind their beloved chateau. They made their way to America, where Consuelo once again demonstrated her resilience. During these years, she channeled her energy into supporting the Free French movement and various relief organizations aiding European refugees. In 1953, Consuelo published her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold. The book offered more than just a glimpse into the vanished world of the Gilded Age. It served as a thoughtful meditation on privilege, duty, and the high price of social ambition. With remarkable candour, she detailed her mother's ruthless machinations and her own journey from powerless young bride to independent woman. The memoir became a bestseller, introducing a new generation to her story. Throughout these later years, Consuelo maintained a dignified relationship with her first husband. When the Duke of Marlborough died in 1934, she penned a touching tribute to him, acknowledging their shared history while celebrating how far they both had come from their ill-fated beginning. Her own mother, Alva, had testified during the annulment proceedings, acknowledging her role in forcing her daughter into the marriage, a final confirmation of what Consuelo had always known. The woman who emerged in these decades bore little resemblance to the frightened teenage bride of 1895. Her beauty, once her primary asset in society's eyes, had matured into an elegant grace that reflected her inner development. The skills she had learned managing Blenheim found expression in her charitable work and the management of her own estates. The diplomatic abilities she had developed navigating aristocratic society served her well in her humanitarian efforts. The loss of her son Ivor in 1956 marked a profound personal tragedy in her later years. Yet Consuelo maintained her strength and dignity, continuing her charitable work and maintaining close ties with her remaining family. She had learned long ago that life's greatest challenges often led to unexpected forms of growth. Consuelo Vanderbilt Balsan died on the 6th of December 1964 in Southampton, Long Island. She was 87 years old and had lived to see the world of her youth, with its rigid social hierarchies and arranged marriages, fade into history. Her legacy lived on not in titles or coronets, but in the example she set of a woman who had found the courage to chart her own course. In the end, her story transcended the familiar narrative of an American heiress trading wealth for a title. Instead, it became something far more compelling. The journey of a woman who had transformed a gilded cage into a launching pad for a life of substance and meaning. The reluctant Duchess had become, at last, simply herself. Behind every Gilded Age fortune lies a story of ambition, risk and strategic brilliance. But Helena Zimmerman's inheritance came with an unexpected price. It made her irresistible to the kind of aristocratic criminals who viewed wealthy American heiresses as walking bank accounts. You see, her father Eugene had built his millions through genuine heroism and business genius, surviving Confederate torpedoes during the Civil War, before parlaying military experience into oil and railroad empires that made him one of America's wealthiest men. And though this extraordinary background should have opened every door and guaranteed Helena's happiness, it instead attracted a predator whose financial desperation masked itself behind an impressive title and aristocratic charm. The Duke who pursued her had already attempted to deceive multiple wealthy families and was notorious throughout both British and American society as a shameless fortune hunter whose spending matched his inability to pay bills. Thus, in today's episode of Old Money Allure, we examine Helena Zimmerman's journey from victim to survivor and the lessons her story teaches about recognizing predatory behavior. Imagine having a father so wealthy he could buy entire railroad systems, so heroic he survived being blown into a river by Confederate torpedoes, and so business-savvy he sold oil to John D. Rockefeller at exactly the right moment, and then using all that privilege to marry a man who couldn't afford to pay for fake jewellery. Helena Zimmerman was born on September 25, 1878, into American industrial royalty that made the robber barons look like small-time operators. Yet she would spend 32 years married to a criminal who systematically destroyed every dollar her father had earned. Her father, Eugene Zimmerman, had built one of the most spectacular fortunes of the Gilded Age through a combination of military heroism, perfect timing, and the kind of business instincts that turned Civil War naval officers into oil and railroad magnates. Eugene's path to wealth had begun with distinguished military service that reads like an adventure novel. Initially refused by the Union Navy for being too young, he persisted until he was accepted as a master's mate in the Mississippi River Squadron. His ship was struck by a torpedo during combat, killing several seamen and throwing young Eugene into the Yazoo River, where he survived what should have been certain death. He went on to participate in crucial battles including the Battle of St. Charles and Duval's Bluffs, earning promotion to ensign for his courage under fire. During the Vicksburg campaign, fought in his hometown, Eugene commanded a mortar boat and made a successful run against the Confederate blockade, demonstrating the bold risk-taking that would later serve him in business. He left naval service as a 20-year-old lieutenant with invaluable experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and crisis management that would prove essential in his civilian career. After the war, Eugene demonstrated the same strategic vision that had served him in combat by investing wisely in oil properties during the early days of the petroleum industry. His timing was absolutely impeccable, He sold his extensive oil holdings to John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company in 1874, receiving not just cash, but valuable shares and a seat on the board. This transaction positioned Eugene at the centre of what would become one of the world's most powerful corporations, providing him with the capital to diversify into railroads. He systematically built a railroad empire, becoming president of the Cincinnati, Hamilton and Dayton Railroad, and eventually controlling numerous other lines throughout the Midwest and South. By 1900, Eugene was worth an estimated $10 million, equivalent to approximately $280 million today, making him one of America's wealthiest men. But tragedy had struck the Zimmerman family early when Helena's mother, Marietta Evans Zimmerman, died of peritonitis in 1882 when Helena was only 4 years old. This early loss shaped Helena's childhood and influenced Eugene's decision to send his only child to France for her education, where she would receive the kind of cosmopolitan training that would prepare her for life among the international elite. During her many years in France, Helena became accomplished in horsemanship and fencing, skills that marked her as someone with exceptional training and access to the finest instructors. She also became an expert swimmer, demonstrating athletic abilities that were still relatively rare among young women of her social class. By 1900, Helena had completed her transformation from a Cincinnati Railroad heiress into an internationally educated young woman described as a handsome blonde and a belle. She was ready to take her place in society, completely unaware that she was about to meet a man whose financial desperation would make her father's millions irresistible and her own happiness utterly expendable. What Helena didn't know was that among the costumed revellers at a Dinard ball in 1900 lurked a bankrupt duke who had already tried to trick another heiress into marriage and was now sizing up his next victim. The 23-year-old man who would destroy Helena's life was William Angus Drogo Montague, the 9th Duke of Manchester. A title that sounded impressive, but concealed a family tradition of spectacular financial mismanagement spanning multiple generations. The Duke was already notorious in both British and American society as one of his generation's most shameless fortune hunters, having inherited his title at age 15 and spent 8 years perfecting the art of aristocratic bankruptcy. His ancestors had systematically decimated the family fortune through extravagant entertaining for the Prince of Wales, while the 8th Duke had married Cuban-American heiress Consuelo Iznaga without securing the expected dowry. When the 9th Duke inherited at 15, he allegedly went down on his knees to the Prince of Wales to beg forgiveness for his mother, an early experience of grovelling that shaped his entire approach to survival. The Duke's pursuit of Helena was part of a calculated campaign to restore his family's finances through marriage to a wealthy American heiress, conducted like a business strategy rather than a romantic quest. His methods were both desperate and deceptive. In 1897, he had unilaterally announced his engagement to the wealthy May Gaulet, much to her surprise and dismay. May Gaulet's father, Ogden, was so outraged by the Duke's presumption that he declared he would rather see my daughter dead than Duchess of Manchester, a reaction that should have served as a warning to other wealthy fathers. The Duke's reputation had become so notorious that newspapers would later publish photographs of him, surrounded by portraits of the 22 women he was supposed to have been engaged to. Eugene Zimmerman's opposition to the match demonstrated the same business acumen that had made him successful in oil and railroads. He recognized that the Duke was nearly bankrupt and must have seemed aimless as he drifted from acting to reporting to chasing heiresses. Eugene insisted that the couple wait, and Helena returned home to Cincinnati, a strategic move designed to break up the relationship and give his daughter time to see the Duke's true character. However, Helena returned to England in November 1900 with a chaperone but without her father, and the chaperone was easily won over by the Duke's charm and desperation. On November 14, 1900, the couple were married privately at Marylebone Church in London, in a ceremony so secret that neither Helena's father nor the Duke's mother was present. The secrecy was indicative of the marriage's questionable nature. The Duke's mother didn't believe the reports until she verified them through the church's marriage register, while both families found out through newspaper reports. Almost immediately after their marriage, the Duke's financial recklessness became spectacularly apparent in the most humiliating way possible. In December 1900, just weeks after their wedding, he purchased 3 imitation pearl necklaces from Frederick & Company jewelers on Broadway in New York for $695 as a wedding gift for his new bride. However, true to his character, he failed to pay for them, creating a scandal that would symbolize their entire marriage. Less than a year later, in 1901, Frederick & Co. sued the Duke for non-payment, with the Evening Express reporting the lawsuit under the headline, "Imitation Jewellery, the Duke of Manchester Sued." This was particularly humiliating because the Duke could afford neither genuine pearls nor apparently fake ones. A perfect metaphor for a marriage built on deception. The fake pearls became symbolic of everything wrong with their union. They appeared valuable, but were worthless imitations, just like the Duke himself, who presented himself as a worthy husband, but was actually a bankrupt fortune hunter. Helena was photographed wearing pearls on several occasions, but it remained unclear whether these were the notorious Frederick necklaces or other pieces, adding mystery to the mounting evidence of her husband's duplicity. Within months of their wedding, Helena would discover that a man who couldn't pay for fake jewellery had far grander and more destructive financial ambitions in mind. Helena's father, Eugene, had wisely structured his daughter's inheritance through trusts to prevent the Duke from accessing the entire fortune directly. But this legal protection proved inadequate against a man determined to spend his way through millions. Despite the safeguards, the Duke systematically depleted Helena's resources while Eugene continued supporting their lavish lifestyle, including buying the couple Kylemore Castle in Ireland as a wedding gift in 1903. The Duke's entertaining at Kylemore was legendary and ruinously expensive. One famous weekend in 1903 saw the Duke and Duchess of Connaught and their entourage bag over 1,000 pheasants in a display of aristocratic excess that would have impressed Versailles. By 1908, just 5 years after receiving it as a gift, the Duke was forced to sell his Irish estates because his spending had become completely unsustainable. Kylemore Castle was mortgaged during World War I to pay debts and eventually sold in the 1920s, while the family's ancestral seat, Kimbolton Castle, also faced financial pressure from the Duke's uncontrolled spending. In 1915, the Duke was declared bankrupt, a public humiliation that exposed the full extent of his financial irresponsibility and criminal mismanagement of Helena's wealth. His spending and debts were so excessive that he spent much of his life abroad, evading creditors and attempting to extract money from wealthy acquaintances through increasingly desperate schemes. Throughout these 3 decades, Helena endured serial infidelity and public humiliation as the Duke's notorious womanizing was conducted openly and documented in society columns. The marriage that had begun with deception, fake pearl necklaces unpaid for by her new husband, continued in the same vein with constant lies and betrayals that destroyed her emotional well-being. Helena's wealth, which should have provided security and independence, instead became a trap that funded her husband's destructive lifestyle while leaving her psychologically and financially devastated. The couple had 4 children together, which likely made Helena reluctant to leave, despite the obvious problems in their marriage and the Duke's increasingly erratic behaviour. The situation reached its nadir in 1935, when the Duke was sentenced to 9 months in HM Prison Wormwood Scrubs for false pretences, having made false statements to a pawnbroker to obtain cash. This imprisonment occurred just 4 years after his divorce from Helena, demonstrating that his criminal behaviour had likely been ongoing throughout their marriage, making her an unwitting accomplice to financial fraud. The Duke's criminal conviction revealed the true extent of his character. He was not merely a spendthrift aristocrat, but an actual criminal who had systematically defrauded creditors and financial institutions. Helena had endured over 3 decades of financial and emotional abuse at the hands of a man who had married her purely for her money and then systematically destroyed her wealth and happiness. By the time of their divorce in December 1931, the Duke had squandered both his and her fortune, leaving Helena financially depleted after 31 years of marriage to a criminal. The divorce was granted on the grounds of the Duke's serial infidelity and reckless spending, though the legal language hardly captured the full scope of the devastation he had wreaked on her life. The Duke remarried almost immediately after the divorce, wedding stage actress Kathleen Dawes on December 17, 1931, demonstrating his lack of genuine feeling for Helena and his primary interest in financial gain. The Duke's immediate remarriage to a stage actress proved Helena had been right to finally escape. But at 53, she was about to shock society by proving that second chances could lead to genuine happiness. After 31 years married to a man who had systematically destroyed her inheritance while conducting affairs and eventually serving prison time, Helena escaped through divorce in December 1931. At age 53, she might have retreated from society to live quietly on whatever remained of her father's fortune. But she had inherited Eugene Zimmerman's resilience, along with his money. In 1937, at age 59, Helena married Arthur George Keith Falconer, the 10th Earl of Kintore, in a ceremony that represented everything her first marriage had not: genuine affection, mutual respect and honourable character. The Earl of Kintore was described as educated at Eton and a career military officer who had served with distinction in the Boer War and World War I, a man with an honourable record of service rather than a criminal record. Unlike her first husband, who had married her purely for financial gain, the Earl of Kintore was not a fortune hunter, but a respectable Scottish nobleman with his own ancestral properties and military pension. The wedding took place in Edinburgh, Scotland, on November 23, 1937, marking the beginning of what would prove to be a genuinely happy marriage based on companionship and mutual affection. Helena exchanged her 3 country houses from her disastrous first marriage for her second husband's ancestral seat in northern Scotland, Keith Hall, where she would spend the happiest years of her life. As the Countess of Kintore, Helena finally experienced the kind of marriage she should have had from the beginning, one based on love and respect rather than financial exploitation and criminal behaviour. The contrast between her 2 marriages could not have been more stark. Her first husband had been a bankrupt fortune hunter who couldn't pay for fake pearls and ended up in prison, while her second was an honourable military officer who provided genuine companionship. Helena lived at Keith Hall for 34 years, far longer than her 31-year nightmare with the Duke of Manchester, proving that it's never too late to find happiness after decades of abuse and exploitation. She died on December 15, 1971, at Keith Hall in Inverurie, Scotland, at the remarkable age of 93, having lived for 40 years after finally escaping her first marriage. Her longevity suggests that freedom from the Duke's toxic influence allowed her to flourish physically and emotionally in ways that had been impossible during their marriage. Helena's story serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of marrying for social status rather than character, and an inspiring example of resilience and redemption. The fake pearls that the Duke couldn't afford to pay for in 1901 had become the perfect metaphor for their entire marriage. Apparently valuable, but actually worthless, just like the Duke himself. Helena Zimmerman's transformation from victim to survivor demonstrates that even after decades of financial and emotional abuse, it's possible to rebuild a life and find genuine happiness. The railroad princess, who had been systematically bankrupted by a criminal duke, ultimately found peace and contentment in the Scottish Highlands, proving that character matters more than titles and genuine love is worth more than fake pearls. Her father Eugene's Civil War heroism had built the fortune that attracted the Duke's predatory attention, but Helena's own courage in finally leaving him demonstrated that she had inherited his strength along with his wealth. The woman who had endured 32 years of exploitation by a man who couldn't pay for costume jewellery spent her final decades in the happiness that had always been her birthright, surrounded by genuine affection rather than fake promises. Your worst dating disaster probably involved someone who turned out to be emotionally unavailable, financially irresponsible, or completely obsessed with their career at your expense. But during the Gilded Age, one American heiress named Mary Leiter made a relationship decision so catastrophically bad, it literally killed her before she turned 40. She essentially spent millions of dollars to buy herself a husband whose political ambitions would systematically destroy her health, happiness and will to live over the course of 11 brutal years. Her story represents the ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when unlimited money meets unlimited male ego, proving that even the most privileged women in history remained completely vulnerable to husbands who viewed marriage as a business transaction rather than a human relationship. Therefore, in today's episode of Old Money Allure, we explore how Lord Curzon systematically destroyed the American heiress who made his career possible. Meet Mary Victoria Leiter, the ultimate Gilded Age success story who had everything money could buy, except a husband who wouldn't literally work her to death. Born on May 27, 1870, into the kind of obscene wealth that makes modern billionaires look like they're slumming it, Mary was Daddy's little princess with a $20 million trust fund. Her father, Levi Z. Leiter, had co-founded the Field and Leiter dry goods empire that became the legendary Marshall Field and Company, because apparently selling fancy fabric to rich ladies was the ultimate money-printing machine. Mary's childhood was basically a non-stop parade of Gilded Age excess. Summers lounging at their ridiculously opulent Lake Geneva mansion called Linden Lodge, complete with their own steam yacht Daisy, because walking to the lake was apparently for peasants. When little Mary turned 11, her socially ambitious mother made a power move that would change everything, packing up the entire family and relocating to Washington, D.C., where they bought the most spectacular 55-room mansion on DuPont Circle. This wasn't just showing off. This was strategic warfare in the marriage market, specifically designed to attract titled European fortune hunters who needed American cash to keep their crumbling estates afloat. Mary earned the adorable nickname Lake Geneva Princess, while being groomed for aristocratic greatness with an army of private tutors teaching her all the essential skills: dancing, singing, music, art and French, because apparently you couldn't properly spend millions without speaking multiple languages. She became besties with the most powerful women in America, including First Lady Frances Folsom Cleveland, proving that even presidential wives needed wealthy heiress friends to make them feel important. By 1890, 20-year-old Mary was ready to conquer London society, where desperate British aristocrats were practically lining up to auction off their titles to the highest American bidder. The dollar princess craze was reaching peak insanity, with wealthy American families essentially running a sophisticated husband shopping operation across the Atlantic. At one of those glittering London balls that rich people throw to justify their existence, Mary spotted her perfect target: George Nathaniel Curzon, a 35-year-old Conservative Member of Parliament with devastating good looks, brilliant political prospects and financial problems that would make a loan shark weep. Curzon was the ideal aristocratic fixer-upper project, intellectually formidable, politically ambitious, socially connected, and completely, spectacularly broke. Mary took one look at this gorgeous disaster and made a declaration that shocked even her fearless contemporaries. "I will have him, because I believe he needs me. I have no shame." This wasn't romance. This was a young woman with unlimited resources, recognizing that she had found the perfect investment opportunity disguised as a husband. Curzon, meanwhile, was busy calculating exactly how much of Mary's fortune he'd need to resurrect his aristocratic lifestyle, while maintaining the fiction that money was beneath his noble consideration. What nobody realized was that Mary was about to make the worst business deal in Gilded Age history, one that would buy her the highest political rank ever achieved by an American woman, and cost her everything else, including her life. The most expensive marriage contract in American history began with a 2-year secret engagement that should have come with giant red warning flags about Curzon's priorities. George insisted on finishing his precious political business before bothering with little details like actually talking to his fiancée, establishing the charming pattern of treating Mary like an inconvenient appointment in his schedule. After barely any contact during their engagement, because why waste time on romance when there were debts to calculate, they finally tied the knot on April 22, 1895, at St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. The ceremony was surprisingly simple, probably because the Leiter family was saving their energy for the real celebration. Writing the cheque that would bail out their new son-in-law's spectacular financial disasters. The Leiters immediately demonstrated their commitment to their investment by providing a jaw-dropping $200,000 dowry and paying off every single one of Curzon's crushing debts. As one brutally honest contemporary observer noted, initially Curzon had married Mary for her money in order to save his estate, but he soon fell deeply in love with her, which was Victorian speak for he learned to tolerate her after she saved him from bankruptcy. This perfectly captured the transactional reality of their union, even as everyone pretended it was a grand love story. Mary's social rocket ship reached absolutely stratospheric heights in 1898, when Curzon landed the ultimate political prize, appointment as Viceroy of India, at the ridiculously young age of 39. This promotion transformed Mary into the Vicereine of India, making her the most powerful American woman in the entire British Empire, literally second only to Queen Victoria herself in the imperial pecking order. The position placed Mary in charge of governing over 400 million people across the Indian subcontinent, which was slightly more responsibility than most 28-year-olds could handle. As vicereine, Mary had to preside over state functions so elaborate they made Versailles look like a backyard barbecue, while managing households larger than small cities and fulfilling social obligations that would have broken professional diplomats. She became absolutely legendary for her jaw-dropping appearance at the 1903 Delhi Durbar, where she wore the iconic peacock dress that became the most famous outfit in imperial history. Indian poet Ram Sharma lost his mind describing her as a rose of roses bright, a vision of embodied light, which was either genuine admiration or the most elaborate brown-nosing in literary history. Mary threw herself into the role with devastating effectiveness, becoming Curzon's secret weapon during what would become an increasingly catastrophic political tenure. She founded Lady Curzon hospitals for women's health care, supported female doctors, and her conservation advocacy helped establish what became Kaziranga National Park, because apparently saving rhinos was easier than saving her marriage. The couple produced 3 daughters during these imperial years: Mary Irene in 1896, Cynthia Blanche in 1898, and Alexandra Naldera in 1904. Political insiders credited much of Curzon's early success to Mary's grace, charm, and supernatural ability to make his increasingly unpopular policies seem almost reasonable. But the same imperial grandeur that made Mary historically significant was already systematically destroying her health, happiness, and will to live. The brutal irony was becoming clear. Mary had bought herself an empire, but the price was going to be everything that made life worth living. The imperial paradise that had elevated Mary to unprecedented heights was about to become her gilded prison, where every ceremony and state function slowly drained away another piece of her soul. India's climate was particularly brutal to European women, and Mary's delicate constitution began crumbling under the relentless assault of extreme heat, crushing humidity, and the constant pressure of performing imperial perfection 24 hours a day. But the physical torture was nothing compared to the social isolation that was slowly driving her insane, as colonial protocol turned every human interaction into a carefully choreographed performance piece. Back in London, Mary had already discovered that British society despised her for being an American upstart, while her American friends thought she was an insufferable snob for playing aristocrat. In India, the isolation became absolutely suffocating, with rigid imperial hierarchy preventing any genuine friendships, while the crushing responsibilities of ruling hundreds of millions demanded constant public appearances. The physical demands were literally killing her, as she endured multiple pregnancies while maintaining an exhausting schedule of ceremonial duties that would have challenged professional athletes. The breaking point came in the summer of 1904 when Mary suffered a near-fatal illness that was almost certainly linked to a miscarriage and subsequent infection that permanently wrecked her health. Here's where Curzon revealed his true character. Instead of staying with his dying wife, he made the spectacularly heartless decision to abandon Mary during her recovery so he could rush back to India and play politics. This abandonment during her most vulnerable moment proved that Curzon literally valued his career more than Mary's life, establishing a pattern of neglect that would prove fatal. When Mary dragged herself back to India despite being half dead, the decision was essentially suicide by imperial duty, accelerating her physical collapse beyond any hope of recovery. Everyone could see that Mary was transforming from the vibrant Lake Geneva princess into a walking ghost, losing weight dramatically and suffering from constant headaches that no amount of money could cure. Curzon's increasingly monstrous personality was making everything worse, as his political struggles intensified and his governing style became so autocratic that even other British officials started questioning his sanity. His decision to partition Bengal in 1905 sparked massive riots and basically invented modern Indian nationalism, creating political chaos that Mary had to help manage while pretending everything was perfectly under control. Curzon's insistence on accepting a second term as viceroy, despite Mary's obvious health crisis, proved that he was either completely oblivious to human suffering or simply didn't care about anyone except himself. The final political disaster came when Curzon picked a fight with Lord Kitchener, the commander-in-chief of the Indian Army, over bureaucratic reforms that literally nobody except Curzon thought were important. This ego battle escalated into a full-scale governmental crisis that ended with Curzon being forced to resign in humiliating disgrace during the summer of 1905. Unlike normal viceroys who retired with honours and pensions, Curzon was essentially fired for being impossible to work with, making Mary's sacrifice seem even more pointless and tragic. By the time they slunk back to England in August 1905, Mary was visibly dying, and 7 years of imperial service had destroyed her so completely that recovery was impossible. The woman who had once dazzled Indian society with her grace and beauty was now a hollow shell, systematically destroyed by the very position that had made her historically significant. Curzon had gotten exactly what he wanted from their marriage: money, status, and political power, and Mary was about to pay the ultimate price for enabling his ambitions. And the final chapter of Mary Leiter Curzon's life began the moment they returned to England in August 1905, when it became obvious that 7 years of playing imperial empress had basically killed her. Mary's body was so thoroughly wrecked by tropical diseases, reproductive trauma, emotional neglect, and the sheer exhaustion of ruling an empire that even the best doctors in Europe couldn't put her back together again. The family desperately planned a 3-month vacation in the south of France, clinging to the pathetic hope that a change of scenery might magically restore the woman who had been systematically destroyed by her husband's ambitions. But Mary was already past the point of no return, her constitution so compromised by what medical records delicately described as a prolonged near-fatal infection following miscarriage, and subsequent surgical disasters, that her body was essentially running on empty. The combination of managing Curzon's political meltdowns, surviving multiple pregnancies in India's hellish climate, and enduring years of social isolation had created the perfect storm of health destruction that no amount of wealth could fix. Mary's transformation from the effervescent Lake Geneva princess into a depressed, chronically ill shadow of herself was so dramatic that even her own family barely recognized her. The emotional toll was perhaps even worse than the physical damage, as years of being abandoned by Curzon during every crisis had left her psychologically shattered and completely alone, despite being surrounded by servants and luxury. On July 18, 1906, just 2 years after losing her beloved father, and barely a year after escaping the Indian nightmare, Mary's overworked heart finally gave up the fight. She was only 36 years old, leaving behind 3 young daughters who would now have to navigate the world without the mother who had sacrificed everything for their father's political fantasies. Mary died in Curzon's arms at their London residence, finally achieving the peace that had been denied to her throughout their marriage, as her exhausted body simply stopped functioning. The official cause of death was heart failure, but everyone knew the real killer was 11 years of marriage to a man who treated his wife like a political accessory rather than a human being. Following Mary's death, Curzon went into theatrical mourning mode, commissioning an elaborate Gothic memorial chapel at Kedleston Hall that probably cost more than most people's entire estates. He hired famous sculptor Sir Bertram McKennell to create a marble effigy that would express as might be possible in marble the pathos of his wife's premature death, and to make the sculpture emblematic of the deepest emotion. Curzon later claimed he believed death would reunite them, which was either genuine remorse or the most elaborate guilt performance in British aristocratic history. The devastating irony of Mary's story was that her family's massive fortune, $20 million that could have bought anything in the world, proved completely worthless when it came to purchasing the one thing she desperately needed: a husband who valued her life more than his political career. Mary Leiter Curzon had achieved the impossible dream of every Gilded Age dollar princess. She had bought herself a genuine aristocratic title, imperial power beyond imagination, and a place in history. But the price turned out to be her health, her happiness, and ultimately her life, proving that even in an era when American heiresses could purchase European titles through strategic marriages, some transactions demanded payment in blood. Her premature death at 36 stands as the ultimate cautionary tale about the human cost of unchecked ambition, and the brutal reality that even the most privileged women were still completely vulnerable to the men who claimed to love them. The Chicago heiress, who had conquered the British Empire, had ultimately been conquered by a system that viewed wives as political assets rather than human beings, leaving behind only a marble tomb and 3 motherless daughters as proof that wealth without wisdom leads to tragedy. Mary Leiter Curzon proved that money could buy aristocratic titles, imperial power, and a place in history, but not happiness or longevity. Her premature death at 36 serves as the ultimate cautionary tale about the cost of marrying for status rather than love. Despite ruling over 400 million people as Viceroy of India, she couldn't save herself from a husband who treated her like a political investment. Have you ever wondered how American heiresses marrying European aristocrats shaped history and society? These transatlantic alliances have captured our imaginations from the Gilded Age to the modern era. They are tales of love, affluence, and social standing, but have even greater significance. Today, we'll explore the rise of these fascinating unions, complexities, and enduring impact. We'll uncover the stories of powerful women, political legacies, and the changing dynamics of love and ambition. Let's step into the world of dollar princesses and British aristocrats, where love, wealth, and social status are intertwined. The Gilded Age of the 1870s was a transformative period in American history. It was a time of remarkable economic growth and prosperity following the Civil War's aftermath. The United States embarked on a journey of rebuilding and expansion, with flourishing industries such as railroads, steel, and oil. The accumulation of wealth during this era had a significant impact on reshaping American society. However, like a coin with 2 sides, the Gilded Age had its hidden complexities. While some individuals amassed immense fortunes through aggressive business practices, they became known as robber barons. The wealth gap between the elite and the rest of society widened, leading to widespread economic disparities. Surprisingly, this era also ushered in new opportunities for women. As the economy expanded, more women entered the workforce, assuming roles in factories, offices, and stores. Some ventured into entrepreneurship, while others pursued professional careers in medicine and law. The Gilded Age was characterized by change and complexity, especially regarding gender roles. As women's incomes increased, their financial impact also grew. They started investing and saving, which significantly changed their financial roles. One notable woman who did this was Hetty Green, the Witch of Wall Street. She made a name for herself as an investor and amassed a fortune of over $100 million, mainly through investments in railroads and businesses. Hetty Green's success demonstrated the changing landscape of women's financial empowerment. During the Gilded Age in 1872, a sophisticated social atmosphere developed. Affluent American families strived for social status by mimicking the European nobility. Their pursuit of this goal involved participating in the social circuit, which consisted of extravagant balls and events that allowed them to display their wealth, prestige, and relationships. During this transformative period, women significantly influenced the social landscape. They didn't just attend grand events, they organized and hosted them while selecting the guest lists. This allowed them to exercise their power and improve their social standing, highlighting their importance in this era. In 1874, Jennie Jerome emerged as an iconic figure of the Gilded Age. A brilliant and affluent American, she moved boldly to London, quickly becoming a prominent figure within the social circuit. Her marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill, a British aristocrat, captured global attention. This historic union not only challenged prevailing gender norms, but also left an indelible mark on history. Jennie Jerome's marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill transcended mere social ascension. It was a trailblazing endeavour characterised by her advocacy for women's rights and her promotion of American interests in the British aristocracy. She navigated her newfound position with grace and intelligence, becoming not just a figure in society, but a catalyst for change in a world still grappling with rigid gender roles. By 1879, American ambitions had shifted. The nation's elite became enamored with European titles to legitimize their wealth and status. Wealthy American women began marrying European aristocrats, while others sought to acquire titles for themselves or their descendants. Pursuing European titles symbolized a desire for acceptance within the European aristocracy, revealing a certain insecurity among the American elite regarding their place in the world. The union of Frances Ellen Work and James Roche, 3rd Baron Fermoy, in 1880, exemplified the typical transatlantic alliance of the Gilded Age. Frances Ellen Work, a wealthy American heiress from the luxurious setting of New York City, married James Roche, who represented the British aristocracy. The union between Frances Work and the Roche family was more than just a simple transaction. It had significant implications for both individuals. Frances Work was financially savvy and used her wealth to help her husband's struggling estate. The Roche family had been burdened with debts for many generations, and Frances Work's fortune was instrumental in saving the estate from financial collapse. Her involvement preserved the family's legacy and demonstrated such unions' practical and enduring nature. In 1882, the trend of cash for titles gained popularity. This practice involved American heiresses marrying British aristocrats to help the struggling British nobility overcome financial difficulties due to industrialization and the declining profitability of agriculture. Simultaneously, American women sought ways to enhance their social status and gain acceptance into European aristocratic circles. These unions were inherently mutually beneficial. British aristocrats obtained much-needed financial stability, while American women ascended to coveted titles and elevated social positions. These alliances epitomized the pragmatic exchange of wealth and status, echoing the evolving dynamics of the Gilded Age. The media was pivotal in shaping perceptions of transatlantic alliances during the 1880s. These unions were regarded as significant events emblematic of the growing wealth and influence of the United States. Women like Frances Work understood the power of the press and strategically harnessed its influence to promote their interests. These marriages were newsworthy not only for their financial implications, but also for their social and cultural significance. American heiresses who married into British nobility became fascinating subjects, and the public closely examined their lives and decisions. Frances Work and her contemporaries recognized the allure of this public intrigue and adeptly leveraged the media to advance their agendas. By 1889, transatlantic alliances had ushered in a new era of social mobility for American families. Women who married British aristocrats gained access to the upper echelons of high society. Within these privileged circles, they mingled with other influential individuals, fostering networks that extended their influence far beyond their initial social standing. Furthermore, women skillfully employed their newly acquired titles to promote their personal business interests and philanthropic endeavours. An exemplary case in point was Consuelo Vanderbilt, daughter of William Henry Vanderbilt, one of America's wealthiest men. In 1895, her marriage to the Duke of Marlborough bestowed upon her the title of Duchess of Marlborough, catapulting her into the uppermost echelons of global society. Consuelo Vanderbilt harnessed her social position to advocate for American culture and values, utilizing her immense wealth to support various philanthropic causes, including the arts and education. In 1892, the London social season emerged as a prominent fixture in the lives of the wealthy and elite. Typically spanning from May to July, this period served as an annual gathering for the privileged, featuring a calendar filled with opulent events such as balls, parties and races. The London social season was more than just a series of social gatherings. It was a meticulously orchestrated dance of high society. During the London social season, women played important roles by organising and hosting events, while adhering to strict etiquette and dress codes. They were expected to embody refinement and grace, and their main objective was to find suitable marriages for young women of their social class. The pressure to secure such unions was intense, with families having significant influence. Marriage became a strategic undertaking, where young women navigated societal expectations and personal desires. In 1895, the transatlantic landscape saw a surge in financial rescues due to the increased wealth of America. This helped British aristocrats face financial difficulties from industrialization and the decline in agricultural profits. They found comfort in the form of American heiresses. These women from across the Atlantic sought ways to ascend the echelons of social status and gain acceptance within the European aristocracy. A symbiotic relationship emerged as American heiresses married British aristocrats in exchange for coveted titles and the accompanying social prestige. The financial stability these unions provided was a lifeline for the British nobility, while American women found the social status they so ardently desired. However, by 1897, not all transatlantic alliances had proved successful or harmonious. Some marriages descended into public controversies and ultimately culminated in divorce. In such cases, women often bore the brunt of societal judgment, unfairly shouldering blame for the marital dissolution. A striking illustration of a scandalous divorce was the tumultuous separation of Consuelo Vanderbilt and the Duke of Marlborough. Consuelo, an American heiress, entered into marriage with the Duke in 1895. Their union was fraught with unhappiness from its inception, ultimately leading to Consuelo's decision to file for divorce in 1906. The divorce proceedings received extensive media coverage, and Consuelo Vanderbilt was in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Critics questioned her choice and criticised her for ending the marriage. She remained steadfast in her resolve to live life on her terms and refused to conform to expectations set by others. By 1899, the phenomenon of transatlantic alliances had ushered in transformative societal changes on both sides of the Atlantic. These unions were pivotal in dismantling age-old social barriers, promoting greater understanding between American and British cultures, and fostering a sense of shared identity. Moreover, they precipitated shifts in the roles and expectations of women. American women who married British aristocrats often emerged as more independent and outspoken than their British counterparts. They were unafraid to pursue careers and engage in public life, forging new paths for women in society. In 1900, the world bore witness to one of the most highly publicized transatlantic alliances of the 20th century, the marriage of Consuelo Vanderbilt to the Duke of Marlborough. This extravagant union joined an American heiress with a British aristocrat in a lavish ceremony that captured the imagination of the media and the public alike. But behind all the glitter and glamour, Consuelo Vanderbilt's marriage was far from happy. Despite her fancy title, she was trapped in a troubled relationship right from the start. It got so bad that in 1906, she did something quite bold for her time. She asked for a divorce. What made it even more remarkable was that she openly talked about the mistreatment she had suffered from her husband. It was a courageous move that challenged the norms of her era. In an era when such revelations were considered scandalous, Consuelo Vanderbilt's public statements shattered the silence surrounding domestic violence and the predicaments women trapped in unhappy unions faced. Her courage in shedding light on these issues not only brought attention to her plight, but also paved the way for greater awareness of the challenges faced by women in similar circumstances. By 1905, transatlantic alliances had begun to yield their political legacies. A striking example was Winston Churchill, who had become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom during World War II. He was the son of the American heiress Jennie Jerome, and his upbringing and connections on both sides of the Atlantic played a pivotal role in shaping his political career. Women who entered into marriages with British aristocrats also embarked on the journey into political circles. Consuelo Vanderbilt, for instance, used her newfound position to become a vocal advocate for women's suffrage, championing the cause of gender equality. She harnessed her connections to further American interests in the United Kingdom, forging a path for women to participate in politics and actively advocate for their rights. As the calendar turned to 1910, the trend of transatlantic alliances began to wane. The rise of women's suffrage movements, which granted women the freedom to pursue social status and influence outside of marriage, contributed to this shift. Women were no longer as dependent on marriage as the sole means of achieving social standing. Furthermore, nationalism swept the United States and Europe in the early 20th century. People increasingly took pride in their national identities, and the allure of marrying foreigners began to diminish. The world was changing, and the focus shifted from international unions to a renewed sense of national unity and pride. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 had a profound impact on transatlantic alliances. The war altered social priorities as the world grappled with the devastating conflict. During this tumultuous time, the idea of marrying foreigners became less appealing. People were preoccupied with the demands of the war effort, and the prospect of international marriages lost its luster. World War I also marked a transformative period for women. They assumed new societal roles, working in factories, volunteering in hospitals, and even serving in the military. These experiences broadened societal perspectives on women's capabilities, leading to a shift away from viewing them as mere objects to be bought and sold in international marriages. The aftermath of World War I brought about a seismic shift in the economic landscape, reshaping the dynamics of transatlantic alliances. The war had exacted a devastating toll on the European economy, plunging many British aristocrats into dire financial straits. Consequently, American heiresses began to view British aristocrats as less appealing spouses. The once guaranteed financial security and social status they offered were no longer assured, leading to a decline in such unions. Fast forward to the 1950s, and the legacy of the dollar princesses continued to capture the public's imagination. These women, symbolic of the American dream, personified the growing wealth and influence of the United States. They challenged traditional social norms, blazing a trail towards greater gender equality. Their journeys from American wealth to British aristocracy embodied women's evolving societal roles and aspirations. As we moved into the 21st century, the concept of dollar princesses found a place in popular culture. Books, films, and TV series delved into their narratives, shedding light on the complexities of these unions. Notable examples included Edith Wharton's novel The Buccaneers, the 1949 film The Heiress, and the 2000 film The Golden Bowl, all of which explored the lives of American heiresses marrying into British aristocracy. TV series like Downton Abbey and The Crown also featured characters embodying the spirit of dollar princesses, providing insight into their challenges and motivations. While these portrayals in popular culture often cast dollar princesses in a critical light, highlighting materialism and opportunism, they also revealed the nuanced nature of their choices and the societal pressures that shaped their decisions. In the modern era, from 2010 to 2023, we witnessed contemporary examples of dollar princesses marrying relatively less affluent British aristocrats. These unions attracted significant media attention and public scrutiny. Notable instances included Kimberly Guilfoyle, an American attorney and former Fox News personality, marrying Donald Trump Jr., the son of former US President Donald Trump. Meghan Markle, an American actress, entered into marriage with Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, bringing her unique background into the British royal family. Amerle Clooney, a British Lebanese barrister and human rights activist, married George Clooney, a prominent American actor and filmmaker. These marriages ignited debates about the motives behind such unions and their societal implications. As of 2023, modern perspectives on transatlantic alliances are multifaceted and intricate. Some perceive them as symbolic of the globalization of the world, fostering cultural exchange and international cooperation. However, others view these unions as cultural imperialism, raising concerns about preserving cultural identities and potential economic consequences for the United States and the United Kingdom. Critics argue that transatlantic alliances may lead to a loss of cultural identity and a drain on financial resources as wealth and assets are transferred across borders. Conversely, proponents contend that such alliances can promote cultural understanding and economic collaboration, enhance international relations, and contribute positively to the broader global landscape. As we end this fascinating journey exploring the complex world of transatlantic alliances, it's evident that these partnerships have had a lasting impact on history, culture, and gender relations. From the Gilded Age to today, American heiresses and British aristocrats have linked their destinies, moulding society in unforeseen ways. But the story doesn't end here. It continues evolving each day. The legacy of these alliances lives on, sparking conversations about love, ambition, and the complex interplay of wealth and status.